Word of God. So here's our history lesson. And by the way, do you know what they did when they landed on these shores? Yes, Mrs. Valentine. They got down and prayed. And so we came from the roots of prayer. And so prayer is a good thing. Bishop George Washington spoke of prayer publicly. Abraham Lincoln. I have all the quotes. Abraham Lincoln. Madison. Benjamin Franklin. You know, Benjamin Franklin was a deist who did not, matter of fact, many believe Benjamin Franklin was not even saved, was a bit of a reprobate to some degree. But he was not saved as far as many know, even though he was witnessed to. Do you know that there is a lengthy little quote by him that you can look up where he said that God, through prayer, God delivered us through the Revolutionary War? And why is it that we're not imploring God, imploring deity or whatever it is, however it's stated in the prayer or in the proclamation? Why are we not seeking his favor in this matter when it came to doing the Constitution? That was from a guy that, for all intents and purposes, didn't want to have anything to do with God and or even believe the way that you and I would believe. See, there's a difference. There's a difference going on in our world. There is a vast shift in people. And I don't like that the minority is always the voice that's heard and the majority gets run over. And it's because the majority is not present. And that is the truth. The majority just doesn't. We're busy. I think, Brother Chris, the majority, all of us have jobs. And all the minority's doing is smoking. And by the way, that's not a comment like you think that's a comment. I'm going to leave that for what it is right now. You understand what I'm saying? And so, anyways, Miss Linda, did you memorize Psalm? Well, you already quoted it to us. I gave you another one. Don't give me that one. Psalm 33, verse number 12. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, and the people whom he hath chosen for his own inheritance. We have seen over the last couple of weeks, last couple of services, different times we've mixed this up. We have watched the pilgrims get on the Mayflower, and we have watched them, we have heard them, we have heard their own words as they have traveled across and landed there in the colonies, and they're going to establish, and we have seen all of the tragedy that has struck them. And we, on Sunday school, last Sunday school, we talked about the starving time and so many people that died. I was even reading a little bit about it again today. You know, about half of the people that were here had died. Of the 14 original family heads, so the men, 14 of them, of the 26, 14 of them died in those 3 months of January, February, and March, the starving time, the sickness and the starvation. But it was more the sickness that had hit them so hard. And many of the women died through that time. At the end of this time, only 3 complete families remain at the end of winter. So it's been difficult. They've been here for like 4 months. Okay, landed sometime late in November, early parts of December. It's cold, it's icy, it's wintry. And so they construct their first building, rough building on Christmas Day, 1620. It burns almost completely. They salvage it. It burns again, and they salvage it yet one more time. It's the holding place for all those that are sick. I was reading today in the accounts of William Bradford about the men on the ship. The shipmates, basically, the captain and his crew, but the crew of the ship were if you were sick, you know, the pilgrims and all them, they wanted them to get off the ship so they wouldn't get it. And then many of them, as a matter of fact, I believe it's about half of the crew died in that sickness. And they were so hard on the pilgrims. They hated them. The whole journey over were critical, were nasty to them. And yet when they got sick, the pilgrims took care of them the same as they would for any. And many of them, I read some of their statements where they said, why would you be kind to us when we were so mean to you? You truly do show the Christian faith in you. And they did that for those men that were so hard on him. Many of them died. Over half of his crew died. And so they sort of come out on the other side of that, I guess. And now they're getting into new seasons, all right? And so I want to introduce you tonight to Samoset and Squanto, all right? Remember that they think the Indians are going to attack them at any moment. They're going to come out of the trees. They're going to murder the rest of them, and they haven't done that. And they figure the winters kept them away. But none of that ever materializes. It's really been quiet as far as Indian activity. Oh, they've heard some occasional shrieks from the woods, and there's been some isolated sightings, but there's been no hostile activity towards them at all. And that baffles them a little because they've heard the tales of the Indians, all right? And on March the 16th, they're there, and they've sort of got what they would call a rough style of a fort, sort of, that they've been constructing. And they have built some structures by now, even though many of them have been sick. And all of a sudden, the sentry on guard cries out, "Indian coming!" And here, Captain Standish, their military leader, is watching. And here comes a tall, muscular Indian wearing nothing but a loincloth. And he's coming walking right down the road towards them. And as a matter of fact, he doesn't stop. He just walks right into their camp and is pretty bold. And he walks right to where the men are standing in front of that common house, which has burned a couple of times. And he pauses just for a moment. Can you imagine their surprise? They've got to be thinking, where's the rest of the army, right? And he, in somewhat, in the words of William Bradford, not very good English, a broken English, but English nonetheless, he raises his hand and sort of salutes everyone and says, what would an Indian say? Come on, all of you are thinking it. How? He didn't say that. He said, welcome. Interesting. They're a little shocked, to say the least, right? Next words out of his mouth. You ready? You'll appreciate this. Have you got any beer? That's what he wanted to know. And by the way, to dispel any rumors, because I heard this and me and Miss Slave talked about it, there was beer on the Mayflower. As a matter of fact, those that were sick desired to have some of it. Now, I can't get, and I'm telling you what Bradford wrote. I can't tell you what beer, what they were referring to when they called it beer. I know what you and I think beer is. I'm going to think beer was different in 1600. I'm not saying it wasn't alcoholic. It was, I believe. The sailors were getting drunk back on the boat. But there were some that were sick, and they desired to have some beer. And they just had water to drink. I don't know why they desired to have, maybe they were sick of drinking water. I don't know. I'm just telling you what I read in Bradford's book, kind of caught me off guard a little bit. But this Indian comes in the camp, says, have you got any beer? By the way, they didn't. Thank the Lord, they weren't a bunch of beer guzzlers or a bunch of drunks. Okay, they were a bunch of Christians, a bunch of Christian missionaries. And so they feed them. They invite him and they feed him because you might as well feed a guy before he's going to kill you, I guess. I don't know. But they're eager to ask him questions. So he tells them his name is Samoset and that he is part of the Sagamores. He is a Sagamore. That means chief of the Algonquin Indians. Okay? And this was not what they say a typical Indian. He had initiated several contacts over his years with various fishing vessels that had come down through that area, and he had exchanged information with them, and they would travel him. He would get on their boats, and he would give them information about the Indians. They would teach him things. He learned English. He obviously learned about beer. He learned many other things from them, and he learned English in the process, but they would travel him up and down the coast on their fishing boats. The English did through this time. So he learned this, and he got to know some of their customs and things, and he told them some geographic details of the area in which they were. He gave them a history lesson. This is where the story gets interesting. He said that this Plymouth colony, this colony was actually situated in the former territory of the Patuxet Indians. I'm probably not saying the name right, but I'm not Indian. Don't really care. All right? It was no accident that these Indians were the most feared tribe of Indians in all of this area. They were known to be savages and ruthlessly murdered scores of European explorers that had landed here. They would promise them trade, and then they would lure them in and they would just execute them. They were ruthless. They were ruthless to the other Indian tribes. No one came near them. But this is right where they landed. But yet we see them. There's no Indian attacks. Why is there no Indian attacks? Because there's no Indians there anymore. Why is that? Because this proud, powerful group of people no longer existed. For 4 years before the Mayflower landed at this point, a mysterious plague plagued this Indian nation and killed every single one of them. Not one survivor. I wonder if the Lord sent that ahead. It reminds me of a story in the Bible about that the Lord said that he would send on ahead, right? When they would go into the Canaan land, that he would send on ahead and clear out the property for them. God had done this for them, I believe that. Not one of them survived. And no one had anything to do with them because they were murderous people, and so none of them have survived. The neighboring tribes were convinced that this had been a supernatural act. Remember, the Indians are sort of supernatural or, in their thinking. And in a final act of desperation, the leading medicine men spent 3 entire days in the swamp to place curses upon the intruders. I'm talking about now, we're talking about, the Plymouth colony that's landed here. They want them gone. And it's just interesting. Cotton Mather, who was a historian, wrote this: "But the devils at length acknowledged unto them that they could not hinder those people from their becoming the owners and masters of the country." God was preserving it, I think, just for them. And so they're all gone. All right? Samoset tells them all of this. All right? The Wampanoags are another group of Indians, okay? And they were the nearest Indians to Plymouth. They were about 40 miles away. And according to Samoset, the chief, Massasoit, he wanted to have peaceful relations with the English. He did. He had some interactions before, but he wanted to have peaceful relations with them. And so, matter of fact, he said, "I want to have peaceful relations with the people of the Great White Spirit." So Samoset informed them of an unusual visitor that was going to come that would be serving as Massasoit. There we go. Massasoit's official interpreter. Now, Massasoit's coming. He wants to have. And so Samoset has kind of come on ahead to prepare for that, all right? And he's going to bring a group of Indians. But Samoset tells them he's going to be bringing an interpreter. And so within a few weeks, the chief arrived in his full regalia. He has 60 painted warriors with him when he comes. Now, you could imagine that kind of outnumbers them. They're a little bit nervous. All right? At this time, you have a man by the name of Carver. He's the governor, okay? William Bradford's not governor yet. Carver's going to die before this year is out, or within about a year, Bradford becomes governor. But Carver is the governor. So Carver supplied what they say his own pomp and circumstance. He had trumpets and drums and muskets and the whole thing, all right? Following, they had some refreshment and exchanged some gifts. A 6-point peace treaty was promptly concluded, and it remained in force for 25 years. I just read all 6 points of the peace treaty that he made with these Indians. It's very interesting. It was basically in context, hey, if you don't attack us, we won't attack you. If anyone comes to attack us, can we call on you and you come and help us? If anyone comes to attack you, you call on us and we'll come and help you, other Indian peoples or anyone else. When my Indians come this way, they won't bring their bows and arrows with them. They'll leave them back at home. When your people come to my way, will they leave their weapons behind? This was the peace treaty. It's the first peace treaty ever signed on this soil. We made it with Indians. All right? They signed it. It stayed in effect for 25 years. All right? But interestingly enough, Massasoit's interpreter was another English-speaking Indian by the name of Squanto. Unlike Samoset, his English was flawless. Okay? They found out about Squanto that he had been a member of the Patatuxet, whatever, I keep saying it different every time, the tribe, that murderous tribe. He was one of them. But he had been kidnapped by British explorers in about 1605, so about 15 years before. He had escaped, and he got captured again in 1614 by British explorers. All right? He spent 9 years in England through all of this. Those British explorers brought him back to England. He escaped. He made it back. He made it back. 9 years he had spent in England. Obviously, he picked a few things up. He supplied the council in New England with valuable information about the Indians. And finally, in 1614, after 1614, he had escaped again, got on a ship, and made it back without anybody finding out. And he made it back to America, and he returned to his homeland. When he arrived, guess what was left of his people? They're gone. They're wiped out. And so he joined up with the this other group of Indians, the Massasoit Indians. He joined up with them, and but now the Massasoits, they go back, and here Squanto stays. He stays with the English. He said, I'm going to stay with you. I'm going to teach you some things. Invaluably, he taught them survival techniques. In the words of Bradford, he was a special instrument sent of God for their good beyond their expectation. He taught them how to catch eels with their bare feet. That sounds like a lot of fun. They thought it was kind of strange, but then they found it was a delicacy because they were fatty and they were good to eat. They gave a lot of nutrition to them, all right? And they were kind of sweet. He also, as spring would come, he taught them how to stalk game, how to refine maple syrup, how to plant pumpkins, and a myriad of other things which people still do nowadays here in America. All of that was taught to the English from an Indian that God had go to England and learn English so that he could come back here and then teach the English that would be here how to do things like the Indians would do them. Do you think God was in that at all, or do you think that just happened? All right? When the spring planting came, his expertise saved most of their lives. He taught them how to plant Indian style of corn and then use fish as fertilizer, and he showed them how to catch alewives from the nearby creek, which were the main fertilizer that the Indian used. He taught them how to catch that. He taught them how to plant the corn, grow the right kind of corn, the right kinds of things, and it literally, they say, saved their lives. They would have died had they gone into another winter not knowing these things. April is now coming. Captain Jones decides to leave, and so he leaves with what is left of his crew. And they say in one of the greatest testimonies of Christian commitment in history, not one single pilgrim got on that boat to come back. They all said, we're going to stay here. And so they stayed, and Jones steered back and went back home. The Mayflower sailed through the harbor and over the horizon. April also brought Plymouth Colony another loss. John Carver died. So he was just governor for about 6 months or so. And so now John Carver dies. This is when William Bradford now becomes governor, stays governor for a lot of years. His wife died 5 or 6 weeks after him. And William Bradford unanimously was chosen as his successor. And so here you have in William Bradford, not only did he write the first history book in America, but he also became the first elected official on American soil. They elected him to be the governor. First time that ever happened in history. They didn't get a chance to do that. They elected him. On May the 12th, the nation's first wedding took place. And Edward Winslow, whose wife died during the Great Sickness, was married to Susanna, the widow of William White, another victim of the first winter. So the first wedding was performed here on these soils, and many, many other great things happened in that time. Leading us forward with the summer months They went by quickly. Everyone's working. They're planting fields. They're doing all of these things. They're building buildings. And it's time for the reaping. And Governor Bradford declared the first day of public thanksgiving to God. And in a letter to a friend in England, Edward Winslow described the festivities as such, I quote, "Our harvest being gotten in, our governor sent 4 men on fowling, that so we might after a more special manner rejoice together. After we had gathered the fruit of our labors, they 4 in one day killed as much fowl as with a little help beside served the company almost a week. At which time, amongst other recreations, we exercised our arms, many of the Indians coming amongst us, and amongst the rest their greatest king, Massasoit, with some 90 men, whom for 3 days we entertained and feasted. And they went out and killed 5 deer, which they brought to the plantation, and bestowed on our governor and upon the captain and others." There really was a first Thanksgiving. They really did eat. They ate birds, fowl, and deer. And all these things they celebrated for really about 3 days of the Indians and about a year. And Massasoit and his braves knew from experience that their English hosts were very spiritual people, because they had dealt with the Europeans, and I'll be careful in how I say this, with those that were working for the papacy, all right? They murdered Indians in cold blood, but these peace-loving pilgrims did not treat them that way. And as a matter of fact, they would say, and it was quoted by many of them, I would not hurt nor harm thee, but thou art standing where I am about to shoot. That's what the Indians would joke, that's how the English always sort of acted, right? And that's how it is with me too. Anyways, God's mercy took care of the pilgrims and brought them through their first year at Plymouth. Squanto helped them. Listen, you read about him, read the things that William Bradford says about him. I mean, spoke very highly of him. Interestingly enough, he celebrated their first Thanksgiving, and it was his last Thanksgiving. He died shortly thereafter. But in the following year, he got a fever that he didn't recover from. But when I watch this, we have a man that taught them all of these things, right? And we've seen the providential hand of God. We've seen the first marriage. We've seen the first election. We've seen really the forerunner of the Constitution being the Mayflower Compact. And all, I mean, nobody had ever done that. And they set out and chartered a government for themselves. Look at all of these first. Could this be this little Indian right here that could speak English that saved these people? And you and I are probably here because of this Indian. Could he have been the first convert of the missionary endeavors of these? For these were his words in his sort of dying words. Pray that I might go to the English God in heaven. Sounds like they probably a witness to this man. So now we have quite possibly the first convert of the first missionaries to ever come to this place because they cared about someone. Over the next 20 years, the pilgrims encountered many additional trials and blessings. And what would happen over the next 20 years, you could read it for yourselves. Ships bringing new colonists because word traveled back, hey, it's a good place. And so they would bring new colonists, but it wasn't always a good thing when they came, because they would not tell them that they were coming. They would not bring enough provision. And it would force the daily rations of those that were here to as low as 5 kernels of corn per person per day. Man, Brother Joe, I don't think I'd make it long on 5 kernels of corn. What do you think? Me and you, 5 kernels of corn each. I'll kill you and take yours and have 10. Next to be Mrs. LaFave, and then I'll have 15. But I'll kill you first. All right? But that would happen all in the first 20 years. They would go through some rough times. Throughout these turbulent years, the pilgrims persevered with courage. And they, many letters and things that they wrote. And just quoting, "Let it not be grievous unto you that you have been instruments to break the ice for others who come after with less difficulty," was one letter that was found writing to those that were back this way. Bradford sort of made another statement. He said, "Thus out of small beginnings, greater things have been produced by His," talking about God, "His hand, that made all things of nothing and gives being to all things that are. And as one small candle may light 1,000, so the light here kindled hath shone unto many, yea, in some sort to our whole nation. Let the glorious name of Jehovah have all the praise." And so there you have really the first Thanksgiving, the formation of those, that would be on the shores. A lot of interesting stories that you would find concerning the Pilgrims, concerning their time here. I would encourage you to do some research. I hope that's been interesting to you. I've learned quite a bit myself that I didn't know. And so maybe we should continue in some historical teaching. That was just the early years. Pick up a copy of that book, of Plymouth Plantation. Read it. I promise you, you'll get sucked into reading Bradford's true life stories. And you know what? Last night I was talking with someone, and they said they might come and visit the church. And they said, "What are your services?" And I was telling them about them services, and we began to talk about the prayer and all that. I said, "Well, I was kind of, because you have all this stuff on your mind." I said, "Well, I've been doing a little bit of teaching about the first Thanksgiving and the Pilgrims and all that when they came here, and they prayed and did all these other things." And they said, and one lady said, I was doing my research, and in my family line it goes all the way back to William Bradford. I said, "Man, that's pretty neat. That's a pretty neat family tree right there." I said, "You got some history. You folk been here a long time, lady." And then one of the other ladies, there was a couple of them standing there, and she was very interested, and I'm not that smart, and I just shared a couple little details with her about their landing here and their crossing and what they were trying to get away from and what they were coming to and how the Lord had brought them. She said, "I didn't know that. I didn't know that they weren't supposed to land where they landed and that it was accidental." And I said, "You should get a copy of the Mayflower Compact and read that and understand it was the first government that had ever happened in all of human history, that man wrote a document to govern themselves, and read those foundational words." It's important for you and I. Why? Because we need to know where we came from. If you know where you came from, you'll know where you're going. If you don't know where you came from, how can you know where you're going? You'll get all mired up. Prayer at a public place will not be a big deal, but prayer is a vital part of our country. It always has been. We are Christian. We were Christian in our founding and in our principles, and we were biblical. Even those that did not believe had a good foundation, and we're getting away from that. And so if there's anything that Christians, let's not be ignorant. Let's not be ignorant of our roots, whether they're biblical, whether we're studying the Bible, whether we're studying history. Some may say, "Well, we shouldn't study history in church." Why? Our history is biblical. Our history is biblical. Those were missionaries on the Mayflower. That's what they said they were coming here to do. And I believe that's what they did. And so they weren't a bunch of Indian killers. Okay? Don't let someone lie to you about that. That was another group of people, the Spaniards. They did. They were Indian killers. And they wanted what? What did they want? Gold. And what did the Pilgrims want? God. And so there's a difference in those things, I think. And what does our country want now? Gold. They want what? Pot. Yeah. A pot of gold. We've just full circle. Thank you, Brother Jeff, for those parting words of wisdom. Our country doesn't want gold. Now they want pot. It's worth more than gold these days, I guess. And what a sad state we're in, isn't it? But all hope is not lost. Amen. Amen. God knows what he's doing. I'm not going to worry about it, not going to lose sleep, okay? And let's pray about these things. Lord, thank you for our rich history and heritage. Thank you for your people